Hello. Well, today I'm speaking with Nick and Sarah Kyle from Largs, Scotland. Welcome, Nick and Sarah.
Pleased to be here, Paul.
This is a real pleasure. We've already spoken with Margaret, and the breadth of your experience in the spiritualistic field is immense, the pair of you. And this is what we'll talk about today. But first, could you give me a little idea of your working background?
Yeah. I've been psychic since I was a child, aware of earth energies, comfortable with UFOs or UAP ideas. And as I became a teenager, I would hear inexplicable voices, which I recognized as my maternal grandmother. And she would give me advice and she would share memories. And after university, during and after university, I did a lot of reading up on the supernatural or the paranormal, and I showed an interest in developing mediumship. But I was also interested in the study of mediums. In other words, bringing my knowledge of research and on what constitutes evidence and how to investigate and weigh up the evidence, as well as the spectacular evidence often provided by gifted mediums. And I was fortunate to meet some of them in my life and have my own experiences, sometimes in seances and sometimes through case investigations, aided ably by my darling wife who's sitting next to me.
Well, I have a slightly different background. I grew up in the middle of the countryside on a farm, and from an early age, I just knew things. And I assumed everybody did. That feeling that, yes, they understand, you would meet someone, see something, and they would maybe say something, and then part of your mind goes, that's just rubbish. That's not the truth, or whatever. But it was really in my early teens when I had some experiences to do with family members and predictions, when I realized there was more to this. And then not everybody saw or heard the sort of things that I did. And that was quite a shock.
Yeah.
And I grew up in quite a religious home. And my parents were very much of the mind that it was the work of the devil.
Oh,
So they wanted the church to have a bigger intervention in my life. But I left home and went away to study, and left almost that connection behind. So that's my early start. And growing up and experiencing things and believing you're just like everyone else, that has kind of stayed with me. And sometimes I think, why aren't other people just accepting what they're experiencing? And why do they put it to one side and say, no, that's not right? It's about this belief in yourself, but it takes time to
yeah.
develop and feel courageous enough to speak out about that.
So how did the two of you meet?
Oh, we're both
School teacher.
school teachers.
Right.
And we met by accident in a school. Well, not by accident. You came and joined the staff. And I wasn't really keen on this person, Paul, at all. Pardon me, not at all. And but I was going through a very difficult time in my life. And he was very good that sometimes he would just sit and listen, wouldn't pass comment, wouldn't make suggestions. And what I really needed was a sounding board. And our friendship grew from that there. And I assumed this was a very happily married man. And I was just grateful for half an hour of his time, a couple of lunch times a week. And it was quite a shock to realize that maybe he wasn't quite as happily married as I had assumed. Over to you.
I've been happily married for a long time, yeah.
Now to me. So we're second timers, second time round.
So
And
have
for
me and
us,
Margaret.
for us,
Uh,
it's been
uh,
successful.
yeah,
Mhm.
and that's yeah. I think I had a personal theory. I think you get married the first time for the genetics of any offspring, and then you then you
Ah,
end that marriage and go to your soulmate, find your soulmate. I think that's I don't know. Seems to
I think,
resonate.
I think there's a lot of sense in that for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So maybe you should add a comment about the investigative work we've shared for 3 or more decades.
Yes, being teachers in Scotland, you don't advertise that you do investigation work
No, I
for
imagine. Yeah.
paranormal or the normal, as we would call it. And therefore, we were very much under the radar. And anytime we investigated anything, we asked for confidentiality because nobody wants to see their names splashed across a newspaper and saying, are these people really fit to teach, to be
Yeah.
responsible for large numbers of youngsters? So for a long time, a lot of the work we did with the Scottish Society for Psychical Research literally went under the radar. So other people would talk and it would be their name that would appear as opposed to their name. And even to this day, I don't, this sounds terrible, I don't use Nick's surname. I use my own surname
Right.
because we're quite independent
Right.
where that's concerned. Okay, over to you.
No, I've offered you my surname and you only take it when it's
Yes.
Nice. So you've both worked in schools and then retired, and you're connected with the university still, Nick. Is that right?
yeah, we both work doing teacher training and teacher assessment, or assessment of students that want to be teachers. And we do that at university level. And it provides a little bit of structure for 18 weeks or so per year.
So you're nobody's fools, the pair of you. You're
We
both
would like
very,
to think, yes.
you're both very credible witnesses. And so tell us a little bit about the SSPR, the Scottish Society of Psychical Research.
Yeah, the SPR in London has a distinguished history of studying phenomena. And one of its founder presidents, one of its presidents was the late Professor Archie Roy, a professor of astronomy based at the University of Glasgow. And he did evening lectures on the history of spiritualism generally. And my friend and I attended and liked them so much that when we asked him when was the next series of lectures going to be, he said that there wasn't one planned, but he intended to set up a charitable organisation offering lectures. And he did that in 1987, and I joined it as my friend did at that time too. So we once a month we would attend a lecture, and we would learn about all sorts of aspects of spiritualism in the world that had been studied, not least of all the evidence of mediums. And I built on that. I became a committee member, and in due course I became president for 10 years. And the idea is that we investigate the paranormal in Scotland. And I would want to just add a little aside. When I was in the north of Italy and I met the late Enrico Marabini, if you like, the grandfather of parapsychology in the north of Italy, he said to me, Niki, I do not like your slogan, investigating the paranormal in Scotland. I said, why not, Enrico? Because I knew that he had had a lot of paranormal experience. And he said, with the kind of ageless wisdom of his years, he said, because there is no such thing as the paranormal. It's all normal.
Oh,
And ever since then, I've often reflected on the truth of that. He did add, at least to the people to whom it happens, but I would go further than that, and I would say that as a generalization, he's correct. Everyone is surrounded by paranormality, but they're either taught or trained or socialized or kept misinformed about the power within each one of us to manifest things that are inexplicable in scientific terms, but only to current science, of course.
Yeah.
So the SSPR has monthly lectures, investigates any cases that people are troubled by, and looks for opportunities to educate members and the public. And it's declined a little bit since Archie demise. But we have high hopes that there will be a resurgence of interest, not least of all because the media is fascinated by the paranormal.
How do we join?
Well, there's an online website, sspr.com, but just for you, Paul, I can put you in touch with the office bearers, and for a negligible membership fee, you would be able to access our archive, many lectures by guest speakers, some of whom are important in the field. And I'm sure it would be the best value for money you spend. For the price of 2 or 3 coffees or a book, you could have a year-long exploration of the Scottish dimension to paranormality.
And it's huge. Scottish dimension is huge.
Yeah.
I read a book by Michael Faraday, Edinburgh After Dark, and he outlines Edinburgh's connection with the paranormal. Very interesting book. So for about £25 a year, then you can join the SSPR via sspr.com and have access to all the archived lectures, etc.
Yes, and
Excellent.
you can attend streamed lectures online via Zoom.
Zoom,
and
yeah.
you can participate in research and investigation discussion groups and special events and so on.
But you yourself have written a book, haven't you?
I've written a few books, but
Have you?
only one co-written in my own name. I normally write for other people. I
Yeah.
like the pun of I'm a ghostwriter. Yeah.
What are the names of the books that you do? They include any paranormal or spiritualism?
Well, I've drafted a biography for 2 Scottish mediums.
Right.
I've co-written a novel, and I'm part of a travelogue which was meant to be based on fact, but I think it's loosely based. But I wouldn't want to promote my name on my books. That may come in time, but
Okay. Are you a member of the SSPR as well, Sarah? Are you active? You must be a member.
Yes, I joined the SSPR not long after Nick joined it. Pardon me, maybe 3 or 4 years. And for about 15 years was a very active member, being their treasurer, case coordinator, everything like that there, and actively out on cases. So I'm very fortunate. Both Nick and I, we have honorary membership because we contributed over very many years. So recently, in the last 3 or 4 months, I've gone back to lectures. I gave up my official position there in 2015 because I think it's hugely important that organizations have a turnover of fresh blood and fresh ideas. And sometimes people are still on a committee who've been very active. It can curtail situations changing, but I think it'll be my intention to become more involved over the next year or so.
Great. You also work voluntarily in a very interesting field.
Oh, I work, pardon me, we live in the Inverclyde area, just outside Largs. And about giving back to your community is hugely important. And 2017, an organisation was set up here called Compassionate Inverclyde. And it has various branches, but the one that I'm most heavily involved with is the one called No One Dies Alone, or NODA. And pardon me, it's run by volunteers, organised by volunteers. And what we do is support patients or clients, however you wish to describe them, who may have no family. And the medical world contacts us and says this person is in the last days of their life here and there was no one to be with them on that final journey. Or we support families who are just exhausted and tired.
Yeah.
And there's a large group of volunteers, there are 50 odd, who in fact take it in turns. It's really, really structured. And for all of the volunteers, it is a privilege to be able to sit with someone on the last steps of their journey.
Have you had any paranormal experiences doing that marvelous work?
I feel that there are various things I could say, but it's a very confidential service.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
What I would say is, I do, when patients are in their final steps of their life, very often what I see is this business of walking in two worlds. And over a period of time, you can see that they're less in the world that we understand here, and they're moving over. Apart from that, other people might say different things. They can see spirit leaving the body. But I just feel one of our strongest aspects is the confidentiality of what we see.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's beautiful work you do there. Beautiful.
Well, can I say I'm just part of a superb group, absolutely superb group of people.
Big-hearted work.
There was one crossing over we were witness to. That was Margaret's uncle.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd been in a coma for the best part of a fortnight. It was all at home at Margaret's mother's house. And on the last night, the Macmillan nurses were there. So we had a cup of tea and they left to go elsewhere. So there was Ruth, Margaret's mother, Margaret, Godfrey's daughter, and myself. And about 10 o'clock, the Macmillan nurses said they'd come back around about 10:30, but they came about 10. So we were maybe offering a cup of tea, but at that point, we heard bump, 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 bump along the landing. And they had a baby monitor. And up until then, you could hear Godfrey's breathing rhythmic. And, he was out of it, but he was breathing rhythmically. And through that baby monitor, we heard, Godfrey, come on, Godfrey. Where's that effect? And we thought it was Ruth, because it sounded like Ruth, but in a slightly different tone. So I don't know why, but the Macmillan nurses were first up the stairs. The daughter was, and then Margaret, then me. And by the time I got there, looked into the room, took his last breath. Mm-hmm. So obviously the daughter was hugging him and upset. And it must have been minutes later that Ruth came out of her bedroom. Oh, he's gone, has he? But we all heard the bump, bump, bump and the voice through the baby monitor. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is that the kind of experiences you meet then when you're on an investigation with the SPR at someone's property?
There's a very wide range of paranormal experiences that we are consulted on, and some of them are like that, yeah. But the typical case is where people experience inexplicable events within their own home, and they interpret it in a way that scares them.
Right.
Our job is to go in, and once we check that there's no normal explanations for these things, we use our knowledge of spiritualist perspectives to try and offer the person different points of view, and right. choose one that suits them for their belief system, which might be a religious point of view, or it may not. Mm-hmm. The paranormal affects everyone regardless.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I reminded of my first experience. And when I first moved in with Margaret, it was a terraced house. The toilet was downstairs. So in the middle of the night, came down totally naked. And I standing by the toilet. I had the feeling there was somebody behind watching, further by the door. So I thought maybe Margaret had come down behind me, but no lights. I didn't put any lights on. So I crossed from the bathroom across the kitchen, and as I left the kitchen for the next room, there was a chink, chink, chink in the glass behind me. It was like that. So I looked, and the glass was there on the counter. I'm thinking, what caused the chink, chink? So maybe there was two glasses, but they weren't touching. I'm thinking, oh, maybe a lorry went up the street. Middle of the night, it just didn't happen, did it? It wasn't highway; it was a residential area. So I ran upstairs very quickly. I didn't like that. And Margaret, for some reason, had got out of bed, was behind the door. When I went through the door, she jumped out. Boo! Oh, thank God you're there. Her boo did not spook me one iota. But, the first encounter with like a physical phenomena did. And it does have a profound effect on people, doesn't it?
Well, I think sometimes it can be upsetting and distressing rather than comforting.
So when you turn up for an investigation, then do you have to do a lot of counselling?
It's not necessarily the first step. The first step would be to ask the kind of questions that might articulate what else could be going on that would explain things. So have you had a recent bereavement? Are you troubled emotionally or physically? Are you on medication and so on? And then there's the history of the environment, which may well be contributing to the energies that the person's experiencing. But as soon as they get the story out, that's when the counselling skills, the soft skills, the support, the nurturing, the trust building, the relationship building, these all kick in. And not every case that's reported to us as paranormal requires mediumistic intervention.
Could you give us some examples?
Yeah, if you would like to say the kind of phenomena that most interest you.
All of it. So
okay.
let's just try the poltergeist claim then, where there's this claim to be poltergeist activity. What would your response be to that situation?
I'll try and give you a comparison of cases.
Okay.
One was a lady on the eastern side of the Central Belt who said that she could hear knockings and rappings and tappings and whisperings that were not quite intelligible, but definitely human whisperings. And we went out to her home, and she pointed at the skirting board, and she said that's where the whisperings are coming from.
Mm.
So I got down on my knees, as any good investigator would, put my ear to the skirting, and I could hear conversations from the tenants in the flat beneath.
Yeah.
So
Sound does travel amazingly. Yeah.
Dusted myself off and said, I don't think those are spirit voices. I think those are your neighbours. And she said, oh, but I haven't told you about these. And she pointed to the washing machine and the tumble dryer.
Yeah.
She said, voices are even stronger when these are switched on. So we switched them on, and sure enough, it wasn't so much whisper as whoosh, 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 whoosh. And it was just the normal noises of a washing machine and I think a tumble dryer. So what we concluded there was that this elderly lady who lived on her own was lonely and perhaps a little fearful and listening and waiting for something. And she heard what sounded like whispers, but they weren't. It was more to do with her being hearing impaired and fearful. Compare that with another case in which the family were so terrified that they began to sleep in the lounge and couldn't go to their bedroom. It was a 3-story kind of house with the top story being an attic and the bottom story being a basement. and there was the ground floor entry, kind of living area, and then bedrooms in the attic above. The gentleman of the house, the father of 3 adult female daughters and his wife, confided in me that he found it very distressing where frightening events were taking place in his home, and whoever or whatever was doing it were invisible to his eyes. And he said to me, "How do you protect yourself, Nick, when you can't see who's attacking you?"
Yeah.
He said, "My role is to protect as well as to provide, and I can't do that." So I said, "Okay, I'm going to have to visit each level of the house." So I went to the basement, and he told me the basement was in a process of being rebuilt. And sure enough, there were bags of concrete, and it was very dusty, and part of the plaster in one wall had been taken down but not replaced, and there was piles of laundry and bric-a-brac that you would have to expect in most basements. And there in the middle of the room, there was a gentleman standing. Now, I knew from prior research, from the interviewing the family, that the house had once been used by a medical doctor as the place where his practice took place. And at that time, he would have been wealthy enough to have a maid or a house servant or a cook or something. And they would live in the basement, servants' quarters. Now, when he was standing there, I said, "Are you the person that's been trashing the basement?" And he looked at me and he said, and pointed to his chest, he said, "Me? Me?" And he shouted, "Look at the state of the place." He said, "I would never have allowed that if I had been here." And I said, "So you're the gentleman that used to live here, who I know only as the doctor?" And he nodded. And I said, "Okay, now I understand." I said, "The family are trying to change and improve the basement, but it's a work in progress and it's difficult." I said, "But you took an oath to help people. And this does you no credit, sir, upsetting ladies and young women, and frightening the mother so much she can't come into the basement to do the tidying up and clearing up." And he turned on his heel and walked out that window, which at that point was first floor to the garden beneath.
Wow.
So he never came back in all those years, but I went up to the bedroom level, and I wasn't alone. My darling wife, Sarah, and another investigator from the SSPR was there, and we were interviewing the family individually. One of the 3 daughters didn't want anything to do with talking to us, didn't believe in the phenomena, thought all the family were going crazy, and never experienced any phenomena herself directly. Now, that should give pause for reflection, because it means you can have a strong belief system that prevents paranormal experience, or at least inhibits, impedes it, and maybe protects you from it.
That's a good
But the
point.
other 2 adult daughters were graduate level university educated. One was graduate and the other was undergraduate. And they were getting phenomena such as when there was no one in the house, the bedrooms would be trashed and heavy furniture moved around and tipped over and so on. And when they were at home, sometimes there would be a sense of a presence in one of the bedrooms. And one of the daughters in particular felt very uncomfortable, as if she was being watched when she was undressing for bed and so on. And eventually she asked her other sister to come and sleep in her bedroom. I think it was actually the other way around. The victim, as it were, went to the sister's bedroom, and one sister lay in the bed and the other on the floor. And let's
You
say
were both in the bed.
the victim as it were, began to experience the duvet being pulled and inappropriate touching, and then suddenly her ankles were up in the air and she was being lifted into the air by her ankle, while her sister was pinning her head and shoulders to the pillow and screaming for help. And when the parents came in, they saw this event, as it were, the daughter's legs up in the air and the other sister holding her down, and that put an end to that particular incident. We detected a sense of a male presence there who had an unhealthy interest in these young women. And after 2 or 3 visits in total, he was reluctantly moved on. He was enjoying himself and didn't want to leave. But we asked people in spirit to help with that, and they were able to. And again, never returned, no more phenomena. The man 6 years later thanked me for, and the team, for giving him his family life back. Never a bad day in the house, and we never asked for any money, and we never sold our story, although we were approached by a TV company to do so. We never did.
No.
There was one other very easy matter, and that was up in the attic. Children were running around, playing, throwing things, and I used my stern deputy head teacher's voice, and they ran.
But throughout all of this, Paul, the third sister remained in her bedroom and experienced nothing.
Well, so she didn't run in when the mother ran in
It
to
had
attend it.
nothing to do with any of this at all.
When the mother was telling her story and being interviewed by the 3 investigators with her husband on one side and I think her daughter on the other, she was lifted by the neck into off state.
That was going to be my next question. Did you see any of this?
Well, we didn't see any spirit assailant, but she went from a seated position to a standing position with a real jerk, and she was either an unappreciated actress with great skill, or it was genuinely happening to her, and we felt it was the latter.
Yeah, ought to have been, yeah.
This entity didn't want her to tell any more of the story because it was giving us ways in which we could get to understand what was going on and deal with it.
Do you think there was more than one energy there then? You mentioned the doctor.
Children in the attic, a doctor figure in the basement, and a male entity in the bedrooms. And they were all persuaded to go within 3 visits.
Wow. But an old house could have multiple occupancy over generations, couldn't it? So there could be more than one spirit person hanging around there.
I was discussing with Sarah just yesterday. I'm coming to the belief that there are 3 key elements to paranormal experience. One is who is involved. In other words, some individuals seem to have more experiences than others, and that might ask prompt questions about their beliefs and their tolerance of ambiguity and the extent to which they live in fear. The other factor for paranormal experience is the environment, because some environments are more conducive and others are more inhibitory. It's relatively rare to get paranormal experiences in brightly lit, busy environments. And the third thing, which I suppose is still a people factor, is emotion. I think a greatly misunderstood and unappreciated aspect of what makes us human is emotion. Now, it's fine if you're talking about love emotions, and spirit can feel that too. But when the emotions are more fearful and maybe negative in nature, I think that's where a grounded, sensible, but open-minded approach can be helpful.
Excellent. So the SSPR would help out if you had a problem like that, and you just contact them via the website, is it?
Yeah, we sometimes get cases in England, but obviously the majority of our cases are in Scotland, in particular the central belt of Scotland. But we can provide telephone counselling anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And occasionally we travel.
So there we are, folks. If you have something going bump in the night, get in touch with Nick and Sarah at the SSPR. I interviewed Tricia Robertson at some point. She was talking about Archie Roy, and we got her videos. So I've heard some of the phraseology you came out with earlier, Sarah, about the case, constructing a case, etc.
He was hugely influential with many people in the society. He himself was very steady, very rational, and very careful about what he would say. And I think these are very good attributes to bring with you when you're visiting. Have as much information as possible, sit down and listen.
And Trish Robertson has a lot of experience too. She's a knowledgeable author, lots of investigative experience, and she's distinguished herself by having some of her research published in peer review.
Excellent. Through this history of work that you've both undertaken, you've met some incredibly talented people, some wonderful mediums. I heard you mention the name Albert Best, and you've had him stay at
Delightful
your
old
house.
Irishman.
Yeah,
Delightful.
related to Georgie Best as well, I believe.
Albert was the adopted uncle into the Best family,
Right.
so it wasn't a blood relation, but it was part of the family.
Oh,
And I know now what I couldn't reveal years ago, which is that George Best used Albert's little flat in Glasgow as a bolt hole when he was escaping media scrutiny or the hordes of women that used to chase him.
so what was it like hosting him then, Sarah?
Delightful. It just felt like I was back at home in the middle of Northern Ireland, and a great uncle or a grandfather figure was in, and he just said what he thought, what he saw, what he heard, and no filter at all, but always delightful. And my two daughters found him absolutely wonderful. They were a little in awe of him because they knew he had abilities that they couldn't quite understand, but they loved hearing him talk.
Yeah, yeah. But when would this have been about? I'm not sure where he slots in on the physical plane. 90s, is it?
This would have been in the 90s because he passed on mid-90s.
He's somebody I haven't read a lot about.
Yeah. He's well known here, but just Paul, as time goes on, memories fade.
Yeah.
And it's only an older generation that we've now entered that remember him and remember him speaking in spiritualist churches, and just the type of information he was giving.
Yeah.
Captured.
Yeah. The late Rosalind Catanach, who ran the Spiritualist Church in London, wrote a biography of Albert, the only one that exists, which was called The Best of Both Worlds, with the play in words there. Belfast Spiritualist Church has a small amount of information because of their own feelings about him and the links with Belfast and Northern Ireland.
Right.
Godwin Smith, an accomplished author and medium, has devoted several pages and maybe a chapter or two to what he regarded as mentorship from Albert. So there's information there. But I can share a couple of things with you about Albert, which it might not be in the public domain. One was that Albert gave me, the very first time I ever saw him on the platform, and I was not well known myself in Glasgow for studying mediums, but I went to hear to see if he was as good as I'd heard. And one of his first messages was directly to me. Now, it's just a little bit personal to discuss in a programme that could be put far and wide, but I was astonished by what he told me. that no one in that establishment could have known except my wife, and at that time she wasn't my wife.
Yeah.
But to move on from that, Albert used to come to our home at least once or twice a month and get some good Irish home cooking. And I used to go to Albert's flat every other fortnight and sit and have a whiskey with him, because I had a fondness for whiskey, as did he. And he used to just talk, and I was soaking up all this knowledge about mediumship within the spiritualist movement. And I found him a great raconteur, and often I laughed, but never found him out in telling me any kind of lie. He always spoke honestly with integrity, and I'll give you some examples of his ability. I was once asked if I would like to observe spiritual healing, and I said yes. And I went to his flat, and there was a small group of people there, and a woman pushed a young man in a wheelchair into the room and basically said, my son has been diagnosed with a large cancer tumor behind the eyes, and it's giving him chronic headaches, and it's inoperable where it is, and he's been given only a short time to live. Can you help? To which Albert closed his eyes and began to speak in fluent German. His guide at that time for healing was a German doctor in spirit. And Albert extended his hands and stroked the young man once on his forehead with his fingertips, and came away in his fingers with a dark globular mass, which he shook in a basin of water to be taken away by an assistant and disposed of. And he sat down, and later when he opened his eyes, he said, what happened? And we told him. Now, here's how skeptical I was. I knew about sleight of hand. I had an amateur interest in conjuring, and I knew that it's quite possible to have something up your sleeve that you can slip down and something. Albert didn't have any sleeves. Right? Short sleeve, yeah. And I was also aware that when you open your eyes and say what happened, that could be a way of making people think you were in an altered state. Perhaps he had learned to imitate German from television or movies or something. So that's how skeptical I was. And this man was a friend of mine. But I kept in touch with the young boy's mother. He wasn't as young as a teenager. And the mother. And about 3 weeks later, I phoned her up and said, what's the update? She said, oh, we got an apology. I said, an apology? From who? She said, my son's oncologist. He said, we must have mixed up your son's scan with another patient, because your son doesn't have a tumour, nor is there any evidence he's ever had a tumour. So we're at a loss to explain this. So apologize.
Amazing. So they get out of that one by apologizing. We got it wrong. Margaret's medical records often get mixed up. So
is that right?
There might be something in it.
And on another occasion, Albert was able to help with cases. And he stopped doing that. And when I asked him why, because I knew that he wanted to be helpful, especially if someone had lost a loved one through a criminal act like murder.
Yeah.
Albert said to me, if the criminal fraternity in Glasgow hear that I can name them for crimes they've committed, how long do you think I would survive?
Yeah, quite. Yeah.
He said,
quite.
I restrict myself now to helping with cases that involve children, unless spirit tell me that I need to reach out to others. And he did occasionally do special fundraising events, but when I knew him, he was already in retirement and unfortunately in failing health. But this is a man who entered Buckingham Palace by the side entrance and gave advice to royalty. This was a man who brought the wife of the Indian Foreign Secretary to dinner once, rather than miss out on Sarah's cooking. And when I asked her how did she know Albert, because she was visiting Albert having left the Queen in London, she said, Albert told my son about his coming death, and my son chose to ignore Albert's warning. Mum assassinated by one of his own sort of staff. She said, and then Albert came and brought through my son speaking in a local Indian dialect to prove it was him. She said, and I keep coming back to Albert because my son and him have some sort of connection there. And I thought that was marvellous.
Beautiful,
She's
yeah.
an Indian princess, a Maharini, and she turned up at our little Glasgow home, draped in jewels and gold and shit. And I'll not name her, but I'll say to you that she had a cultivated accent, and she was what I would call from a noble family in the Sikh religion. I could go on and on about that one medium. He was exceptional, possibly the best medium that I've ever known, and I've known a few. But I know that you have other questions.
I could talk about Albert Best all night as well. The only thing I can remember is reading, as you mentioned, Gordon Smith in one of his books. And he said that Albert was with shamans out in Africa, I think it was. And in the fire, little fireplace in the middle of the hut. And in the fire, he saw his wife and children who were already deceased on the earth plane. And he didn't like it. And his reason for that was that he had to lose them all over again. Having seen their imagery, that they're alive and well again, he had to feel the bereavement again. So that's what Gordon said in his book about Albert.
That's right.
And I have no wish to say anything about Gordon's view of things. But Albert told me that story and asked me not to repeat it.
Yeah. He said not to repeat it.
Not to repeat it during his lifetime.
Oh, during his lifetime.
And it was more than
so I don't have to edit it out then.
Yeah, it was more than seeing his wife's image and his children's image. They ran round the fire in the centre of the room and leapt into his lap and hugged him and kissed him in conversation. Then the wife came over and he said he doesn't know how many minutes that lasted, but it was all too short. And the black witch doctor from the village that had invited Albert in, also in mysterious circumstances, but invited him in, said, Albert, you're going to have to let them go because the energy is going. And they became like snow. Little particles of white went into the ground. And Albert said in all the years that he's worked for Spirit, that was the one thing he most appreciated that Spirit did for him. And he didn't need it to be repeated to know that his wife and children would be waiting for him. Because they told him.
Yeah. Oh, how beautiful.
He was quite tearful telling that story, Paul.
Yeah.
And he talked about how he felt coming home on leave from World War II during the Belfast Blitz to discover that his house had been destroyed and his family, and the toll that had taken on him, and the joy that he felt for however long, he said, it was too short the time. And just as Nick is just saying, the fact that he will meet them.
Yeah. It's a wonderful
it's a beautiful
story, isn't it? Beautiful.
I don't feel able, Paul, to share with you the names of people that he helped, but let's just say the most famous Hollywood actors and singers visited him in his Glasgow tenement, and the neighbours used to think Albert was a drug dealer because the street he lived in would be sealed off by armed police as the VIPs went upstairs, saw Albert and left again. And one could easily make claims like that, but Albert had the photographs in a private album to back them up. And I've seen the private photographs. I think Gordon Smith may have them now, but certainly I saw them when they were current.
Oh, marvellous. Yeah.
And the other thing, do you know what he loved? A hot toddy.
Hot toddy.
We go and visit, would you just make me a wee hot toddy? just the way they would make it in Ireland.
Lovely. Oh, that's beautiful. And well, maybe we could do another interview then just on Albert. But you've had an interest in shamanism and that kind of spirit work, and it's taken you abroad, hasn't it? You've been to Peru, is it?
Yeah.
What are
There's
your experiences with shamanism then?
Well, I'm the son of a clergyman. And as I've grown up into adulthood, I've begun to see organized religion and churchianity, as I call it, as a series of rituals that carry great significance for the participants. But I was also aware that outside of the Christian religion, there were other rituals, some nature-based or based on concepts of spirituality that were not necessarily Christian. And there is a local shaman north of Glasgow. His name is Stephen Mulhern, and he runs a place called Glendrick Lodge. And I spent about 18 months learning from Stephen the rituals and practices that he felt grounded you to Mother Earth while energizing an aspiration for the invisible or spirit world. And when I finished with Stephen, just because I'd done his year-long course and an extra few months, I began to look around and do some reading on other either shamans or gurus or people who had studied them. And one of the things that I was keen to do was to visit locations such as Machu Picchu in Peru and see if the earth energies I had experienced as a child in Scotland, I would pick up as an adult in Machu Picchu. And I went there and I met the chief guard, the deputy or chief guardian for Machu Picchu, a shaman called Cucho. And Cucho, I later learned, was quite well known in America and round about. And he talked about the Crystal City when he was speaking about Machu Picchu.
Oh.
He said, if you like, in your language, I'm a medicine man. He said, I take the world of plants and nature and I make herbal remedies and people consult me for help. And I said, well, I would like to consult you about spiritual and psychic development. And I said, and I have come to South America prompted by spirit. And he said, okay, on that basis, he said, I will do my first private sitting of the year with you and one other person present. My companion for that trip was a friend of mine who was a physics professor, and he opted out of taking ayahuasca because he was well aware of the dangers of doing that. One man had died a few months earlier in a different setting, and you had to have a strong heart, which at that time I believed I did. I did the ayahuasca ceremony. I understand now why writers such as Graham Hancock can speak about being under the influence of the drug and communicating with other world entities, because that happened to me too. Right. My own view, with the benefit of hindsight, is that it's a drug-induced entry into the subconscious, right, rather than a direct line of communication with an outside external entity. But it was thought-provoking and it was moving, and I can talk to you perhaps at greater length some other time. But I came away from it thinking, I won't rush to go back to that, but it was fascinating. And I then went to Brazil. And the story, to keep it to its absolute minimum, is Spirit told me to go to a place called Sao Paulo. I had to Google it to find out where it was in Brazil.
I don't know where it is. It's a big place, though. I know that.
Yeah, 3 times the size of London. And Spirit, when I was in Scotland, said to me, we want you to go there. And when I said why, they said, because there are things we want to teach you and it's more difficult in Scotland to do that. So I resigned from my job because they told me, yeah, they knew I'd have to do that. And I jumped on a plane with my physics professor friend, and we went off on a spiritual adventure. And we arrived in Sao Paulo at midnight. And the following morning at breakfast, my friend was rubbing his hands in gleeful anticipation for this adventure. And he said, so where are we going? What are we doing? I said, I have no idea. He said, no, no. You'll have a name, a number, an address, an organization, something. And I said, nope. He said, Nick, we've traveled halfway across the world and you don't have any information to go on. I said, that's correct. But if Spirit have asked me to come here and I've come here and I have to be open to learning experiences, they're not going to let me down. Yeah. And he leant across the table and said, but what are we going to actually do? And I said, we'll go a walk. He said, where? And I said, I have no idea. And he said, you're in a city 3 times the size of London. You're going to be walking a very long time to cover even some of it. But we started walking, and after 40 minutes of meandering in no particular direction, I stopped outside the 12-story nondescript office block, and it said Esprit beside the main door. And I figured it was probably, it might mean spirit in Portuguese, and it might refer to somebody that made trainers or running sports gear or something. But I walked in. As soon as I walked through the door, I knew I was in the right place, because on the right-hand side of me, there was a bronze bust of Allan Kardec. And I recognized that bust because he was the founder of Brazilian Spiritism. And the woman behind the rather big reception desk said, can I help you, in Portuguese? And I said, my name is Nick, I'm from Scotland, and Spirit has sent me here, but I don't really know why. And she smiled and called a man over, big, tall, distinguished-looking gentleman. And I thought, no, she's called security. There's 2 crazies here from Scotland. Get them out here. And he came up and he smiled, and she told him what I had told her, although obviously she was speaking Portuguese. And he turned and shook my hand. He said, welcome, Nick. Spirit told us 2 weeks ago you'd set out on your journey to us. He said, you have walked into the largest spiritual healing hospital in the world, wow. Certainly in Brazil, but wow. We don't know of anyone anywhere in the world that's bigger. Wow. We operate 11 stories of this building, one of the 12 stories of car park. He said, and we see 5,000 patients, and we have 500 healers, and every door will be open to you because wow. So I was only there for about a week and a half maybe, and I sat in on healings and consultations and public lectures and treatments, and I came away convinced that there was a methodology, a modality of healing practice that I could use in Scotland, and I've been willing to use it ever since. I think there are a lot of frustrations with healing work. And as a student of psychic or spiritualist healers, I see a lot of those difficulties from both sides, the practitioner and the external critic or skeptic. And that's the story of meeting a shaman and going to Brazil. We also went to Rio de Janeiro, but that was a typical beach bum sort of holiday, where we were just enjoying the tourist sites. And yeah. While your listeners are interested, everybody knows Christ the Redeemer statue that stands on the pinnacle of rock overlooking Rio. But not everyone knows that if you go to the heels of that statue, there are 2 little doors. And when you walk in, there's a chapel. It's only big enough maybe for 20 people or something, maybe a little more. But I didn't know that, and I was able to go in and stand in the feet of Christ, as it were. And it was one of the memorable experiences.
You got a photograph of that?
I don't have a photograph. I don't usually take photographs actually when I'm on holiday, but I know it's available on Google. Christ the Redeemer statue. chapel at the feet. And, you know.
How marvelous! And did you go to any of those trips with Nick, Sarah?
No, I was still working.
Oh,
This was Nick's present to himself, as it were. He retired a year before me. And so for the length of time he was away, I kept getting messages. In fact, he was very reluctant to come back home. And our friend said, you need to come home because I'm not meeting Sarah at the airport and saying
alone.
that's it.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. How lovely. How marvelous.
I know.
That's
But
good.
it was life changing, altering for you. This whole, and it took months for it all to work through and to think about things and just make peace with everything that you had experienced.
It gave me a lot to think about. And so, for example, sitting in a restaurant, Spirit told me, go and talk to the woman who's just sat down outside. So I put my knife and fork down and stood up, and I couldn't see anyone outside. But my friend who was sitting at the table could see, from his angle, a young Oriental girl that was sitting in the bench seat slightly to the side of the restaurant window. So I went out and I said to her, is it all right if I sit here, pointing to the vacant seat on the bench? And she turned and said in a very crisp enunciation of good Oxfordshire English, certainly, by all means. And I said, oh, you speak English? She said, yes. And I said, where did you learn such a lovely accent? And she said, well, I went to England for 6 months to learn how to speak in English. I'm an actress and I sing just to pay the bills, but I'm hoping to get in some actress acting roles in America. And my agent told me if I had an English accent, that would be even better. So that's why I did it. And she said, but why are you here? Because this is a part of São Paulo where tourists don't normally come. And I said, oh, it's a long story. I said, Spirit have asked me to show an interest in healing and sent me here to learn about it. And she went, well, you're sitting next to the right person. I know everything you need to know about spiritual healing and mediumship in Sao Paulo.
Wow.
So we spoke for
Wonderful.
20, 25 minutes, and she was able to tell me about spiritualism in the UK as well as spiritism in Brazil.
Wow.
And that was fascinating. And there were other things like that one might call coincidental, and yet they seem to be synchronistic or a coincidence with more meaning to it.
Yeah. Going back to what you just said there, then it's spiritism, spiritualism. What is the difference? Or is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of differences depending on the detail that you look into it. Essentially, it's the same thing. It's mediumship and communication with the spirit world. But in South America, they have a wider range of concepts, some of which are nature-based. I mean, here's just something that I picked up. I knew that in the Amazon rainforest, there were unexplored areas, but many thousands of species of plants unknown in Europe, except maybe by botanists. And when I asked a shaman in Peru, how did people who lived in the Amazonian jungle know which plants did which things, which benefits? He said, the plants tell us. And I looked, what do you mean? He said, well, a shaman, he said, or a medicine man, we go into the forest, that's what they call the jungle, and say, I have someone who needs some make-up health condition, say asthma or something, and the plants would draw attention to themselves. And you harvest them and you prepare them, and there you have the solution. And I remember bursting out laughing at the idea that the plants would give you a wee wave and say, pick me because I can help this condition. And then I was I met Native American Indians from the American-Canadian border. and they said to me, Nick, how many one-legged friends do you have? And I began to think of the few people I know who've got an artificial leg or an artificial limb and so on. And I said, maybe 3 or 4. And they went, what? You've got thousands, if not millions. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, our one-legged friends, the trees. And I said, trees are your one-legged friends? He said, yes. He said, and you're very helpful to your spiritual development. He said, you're so grounded. He said, sometimes the roots are greater in length than what you see above the surface. He said, but they're constantly aspirational and reaching up for the light. He said, and they've developed such strength between being grounded in Mother Earth and reaching up to the grandfather sky. He said that you just by aligning yourself with the tree trunk, he said you can draw on its energy and power and wisdom. And I've been doing that ever since. It was Albert Best that started me to do that. But there's North American, South American Indians, they have a view of nature, which I think has been socialized out of us.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, other than the pharmaceutical companies, I don't know very many people who are not gardeners who see the power of plants.
Yeah, definitely. And also stars. I saw something on Facebook about first encounters with some native tribe somewhere. I don't know where it was. It might have been anywhere in the world. And these people were shocked that the scientists couldn't hear the stars talking to them. They couldn't hear the universe. They just couldn't believe it. You know, it was poor man. He can't hear his dreams. Can't hear the stars. You know? So it's true. We've lost so much.
Yeah. One of the things I remember about Allan Kardec's work, and I have 5 of his books here, although I can't say I've read them all right to the end. But one of the things I remember him saying is he was asked, how does one prepare for death so that you do not become an earth-bound, trapped soul? And he said, well, it depends on the way you choose to live your life as to how you die. And
Lovely.
he gave a continuum. He said, on the one hand, you have people who lead such an expanded spiritual awareness of things that they're almost 1 foot on each world. And when they pass over, it's in the twinkling of an eye. It's effortless, so much so that sometimes they don't even realize they've made the transition. And it takes them a little while to orientate themselves to being in the spirit world. He said at the other end of the extreme, you get people who are nasty and earthbound in their psychology, tied up in the body, into material things, not wanting to let go of their power. And when they die, they fight it every inch of the way. And when they die, mentally, they're still in the body. Energetically, they're still attached to the body. And they may have unfinished, vengeful thoughts that keep them trapped in a location or attached to people. He said, now, the distress for them only increases as their body slowly decomposes, because they see and feel that. Most people are somewhere in between. So pay attention to how you live if you want help for when you die.
Yeah, I mean, when there's so many visions of ghosts and other paranormal that is experienced by so many people, there has to be a lot of spirit. When you enter the spirit world, you don't enter it correctly and you end up trapped somewhere else, trapped by your own mind, maybe, but nevertheless, you're not in the heaven that you thought you would gravitate to, I would say.
You said that you were particularly interested, Paul, in physical phenomena.
Yeah.
Do you want us to talk about maybe the scroll experiments?
Yeah, that would be a great one.
Or subsequent experiments?
I don't know a great deal about. I know it's Robin Foy's circle and his wife, isn't it? I don't know much more about it though. So yeah, talk about.
Well, they both passed